Hello, it's Lady T. Welcome to another episode of Royal Black and Elite. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we have a very great episode and different episode as we begin to peel the onion back on Black royalty. Throughout some of my other videos, I spent time on really pointing out Black royalty, Black millionaires, and really what was happening in the United States. But we also have a whole section full of African royalty. And I thought it really important for me to do this lesson today, this podcast today, because a new movie is coming out. It's called Woman King, and it stars Viola Davis. Now, the reason it's controversial is because it depicts the lives of the women warriors of the Dahomey tribe. And the Dahomey tribe were notorious slave traders. But before we get into the story, will you please like, share, and subscribe? And I want to thank everybody who already has. The channel is growing so much. When I look at the likes, when I look at how many views that are happening, and we are marketing very little bit. I mean, I just really started this channel because I really wanted to make a platform where this information was going forth in a concise way and in a way where it kind of was all kind of cataloged in one place. But the response has been amazing. Thank you, everyone. So let's get into the Dahomeys so we can get ready for the release of Woman King. Located in West Africa, the Kingdom of Dahomey, which is modern-day Benin, existed between 1600 and 1904. And they were a part of a larger kingdom called the Oyo Kingdom, which required them to engage in the slave trade. Now, the Dahomeys were made up of the Fan people, and these are the largest ethnic group in Benin, particularly in southwest Nigeria and Togo. Dahomey became a powerful kingdom in the region. In fact, it became one of the most recognizable African nations by Europeans because they were participating in the slave trade. Now, what they were doing was not uncommon during that time. The Africans were fighting against each other, and one way that they subdued one another was to capture each other and enslave one another. And they would sell the slaves that were captured, or people who they considered criminals or who were in debt. They would sell them to the Europeans who were coming on the land at that time. So you had the Dutch coming in, Europeans coming in, and even Muslims coming in, and they were selling and they sold the Africans to these people who were trying to colonize not only Africa, but who were bringing them back to plantations in North America, in the Caribbean islands, all over the world. So slavery was really a worldwide thing. It wasn't just a U.S. thing. And we're going to go into that and do more studies on that, because I think the conversation needs to be had so we can get an understanding. That way we know how to move forth. But for our conversation today, those were the Dahomeys. And the Dahomey, they really made their money and they really built their financial empire on conquest and the slave trade, diplomatic relations with Europeans, and they had these diplomatic relationships because of the slave trade, centralized administration, taxation, and an organized military. So they were somewhat industrialized, and that's what made them actually targets of the Europeans because they saw that they already had a system. The Dahomey captured women and children and even African royals. Check out my story about Sarah Forbes Bonetta, or Omoba Aina. She was a Yoruba princess, and she was captured by the Dahomeys and later given as a gift to Queen Victoria. She became a very wealthy socialite. So for most who were captured, it didn't turn out like that, so it did turn out better for her. Payment for capturing their own people were quite low. They were given rifles, gunpowder, fabrics, tobacco, pipes, and alcohol. In my opinion, a very small payment for the damage that was done to the African nation and to the African people. And remember, we're going to get into this even further as we near Black History Month. So much interesting history involved in Africa and how we all came to America and how does it impact us today and what we should be doing as a people. So this is really, really great. Those who were not sold into the Atlantic slave trade were brutally executed by the Dahomey, including mass executions and human sacrifice. They called it the annual customs of the Dahomey. Only after pressure from the British after they abolished slavery was the Dahomey forced to stop selling slaves, and that led to their economic decline. And so what happened is their men were being sold, and their communities were being decimated. King Hujaba, who ruled between 1645 to 1685, and he was the third king of the Dahomey, he was the one who was rumored to have started this women's military unit, and from there really the legend grew. His daughter, Queen Hujaba, who ruled for 2 years from 1716 to 1718, established the female bodyguard. And if you want to know more about Queen Hujaba, always, of course, click in. I have videos on all of these people, so be sure to keep on checking in and reading and learning more about where we came from, how we ended up in this position, and what we can do differently. Now, the women who were that group, they were referred to as the Mino, and that means our mothers. They also were referred to as Ohosi, or king's wives. So the women who made up these women warriors, they were the wives and mothers of these men who had been captured by other tribes. Now the king of Dahomey at the time, whose name was King Gazo, and the Dahomey king at the time was named King Gazo, and he was just war thirsty. He increased his military budget and recruited the women to fight, and it's rumored some girls as young as 8 years old. Women who joined the women warriors also had to live under strict rules, like they couldn't have any children, they couldn't get married, and they all had to be virgin. Now, beyond being the toughest and the strongest of the girls and young women, they were very wealthy, and they were really highly regarded. So these women, they had money, they had power, and I think that's why it's important to show this conversation and to have this conversation, because even in the midst of being subjugated in such a way, they still thrived. They had a seat at the governing table. And their seat at the table, when they did seat, they really advocated for pushing the palm oil versus slaves. So the women were very active in trying to stop the slave trade amongst their people. Now, there was believed to be between 1,000 to 6,000 women, and they were huntresses, riflewomen, reapers, archers, and gunners. And they wore different uniforms, and those who were in command, they had, very specific uniforms. They also fought in slave raids, according to Nora Neale Hurston in her work Barracoon. So we see there that they did fight also in slave trade. However, they turned their ire toward the Europeans when there were too many Africans being enslaved. They were decimating their villages. The fighting that they were doing, the inner fighting that was happening upon the continent, it became null and void after they began to realize that the real enemy was coming in and stealing them. And so they began to officially fight the Europeans, first with the French, and that was called the France-Dahomean War. Now, officially, the women warriors, they fought in one major battle, Cotonou, where they fought the French in hand-to-hand combat. But they were just truly brutally slaughtered, because despite their great fighting skills, the French had guns. So they went in to fight, but they really didn't have anything to fight with other than their hands and their spears. Unfortunately, during the Second War, that's when the French completely decimated the Dahomey kingdom. So they eliminated 86 regular Dahomey fighters and 417 Dahomey Amazon women. Only 6 French were lost in that war. Now, let me just say this. The term Amazon was a European saying that they called these Dahomey women. And so they weren't themselves Amazon. They didn't live in the Amazon, but this is what the Europeans would call them. After being captured by the French, the Dahomey Amazons were disbanded. Now, according to a historian who interviewed about a dozen of the ex-Amazonians, reported that after their disbandment, it was difficult for them to adjust because they were used to training and fighting. So some of them actually guarded kings in Africa. Some of them continued to fight in secret. So they definitely still stayed in effect. So that is the legend of these women warriors who had to take on the role, and some of them even said, I'm no longer a woman, I'm a man, because they were fighting for their country. And so on one side is horrific because of what they did in the slave trade, but it's also inspirational because these women garnered great power and they learned how to take care of themselves. And if it wasn't for gunpowder, they probably could have won. Now, if you plan on watching The Woman King, please join me back here tomorrow as I put up my review. I'm going today to see it so I can come in and tell you about the costume and the historical points. How well does it line up to what the truth of who the Dahomey truly were? I'm so glad that you were able to join me for another episode of Royal, Black, and Elite. I hope you've learned a lot about the Dahomey tribe. And as always, thank you for liking, share, and subscribe. Now drop by the merch store and make sure you purchase your t-shirt, as well as Amazon to pick up Royal, Black, and Elite. And I'll talk to you on the other side as we give a review on the new movie, Woman King, starring Viola Davis, as we learn more about our Black history and really what it all means in terms of today and how to move forward. Have a great evening. Thank you for listening.